after you've learned all of the skills, then you try applying, right? And so you never know that they might be actually open to someone like you, because in the gaming industry in particular, it takes a lot of passion. You need to really be into games to be able to survive, because we are really busy. This is where the passion for games really just plays a huge role in your being able to enjoy the type of work that you're doing.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Inside Japan podcast, which is sponsored by JobsinJapan.com, the best place on the internet to find your next job in Japan. I'm Charlie, and on this episode I'm speaking with my friend Kristel, who last year landed her dream job as a video games media director here in Tokyo. We talk about having passion for your work, what it takes to get into the games industry in the first place, and what it's actually like day to day. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Kristel, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
No, thank you. I was very excited to speak with you about my experiences here. So I'm looking forward to our conversations today, and I'll be as honest as possible.
Awesome. Me too. I've been really excited about this one because I'm also really interested in video games, and you've been working as a video game media director in Japan. So how did you do that? How did you get into that job?
Yeah, so it was actually quite a long-winded story there, and I don't know how far you want me to go into the story, but I guess to give you a gist of it, right? So I had always been very interested in video games, so that was basically my pastime when I was younger, and that ultimately led me to Japan, right? I was very into Final Fantasy. That's my hero game.
Me too. Oh,
Yeah. Oh my gosh,
amazing.
graphics are amazing.
I actually learned how to play piano so I could play the piano collections from Final Fantasy. I
Me
loved
too.
it. Oh my
Me
God.
too. I mean, I'm not musically talented. Unfortunately, I tried. I brought the whole copy to my teacher, and I was like, I want to play this, and she was just like,
Oh,
no,
that's
you have to play
amazing.
the basics first, like Happy Birthday. I'm just like, it bored me to death. And so we never got to that point where I could play it. Unfortunately, I got bored. But yeah, it started with that one, and eventually I was able to get an opportunity to study in Japan on exchange during my university years. And I went back to graduate, and then I just knew that, and I was working for a while, for about a year or two, and I just knew that if I didn't go back to Japan to pursue my dreams of working here, I knew that I would kind of regret it, right? Because if I stayed, I knew my path would basically be set, right?
Yeah.
And so I took a risk, and I decided to come here. And yeah, and to keep my type of profession, right? I was working in business management and marketing. That's what I studied as well in school. I knew that I had to have a specific level of Japanese, and so I had to study real hard for that. So while I was working, I was studying at night. Right. And sometimes it got so hard that I was literally crying and studying at the
Oh
same
my
time. I
gosh.
was
Oh,
no, because it's really hard.
it is difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, like as an English speaker, right? Like coming from alphabet to kanji, like Chinese characters, like it's so hard. And I had a very limited amount of time because I gave myself a timeline
Mm.
to be able to figure it out. And
And
so yeah,
I don't know if you've seen there are sort of government reports on how long it takes for you to learn different languages, and going
I
from
did.
so going from English to learning something like French or German
Yeah.
or Spanish, because they have common roots,
Yeah.
it's something like 550 focused hours of study. And Japanese, because there's almost no common roots at all, it's one of the most difficult to learn, and it's
Yeah.
2,200 hours, so it's 4 times as long to
How
learn.
many 2,000 hours? How long is that in months?
Oh my
Like
God.
I never really
A week
computed.
is like 168 hours or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
2,000 hours would be like essentially 15 weeks or something of like full, like of every single hour of every single day studying.
Yeah. No, but then I beg to differ, because I feel like it's because there are some people here who've lived here and try their best to learn it, and it's really just it takes years sometimes, right? So yeah, it was really tough, but I had a dream and I wanted to pursue it. Like the thing with me is I'm all or nothing most of the
Mhm.
time, like whether it's in my personal life or with work or my career, or even with my studies, right? Like if I'm gonna put myself in there, I'm gonna throw myself in there. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so I had a time limit. And it eventually led me to my previous company before my current one, right? And I suppose, like, with all of my experience with digital marketing and working with websites and my very intense passion for games, the right opportunity just came at the right time, and I was very lucky to have been given that opportunity, right, and to have been chosen for it. And
Would you say, sorry to cut you
yeah,
off, but would you say that that's actually something that you really need to be aware of, and it's kind of necessary, is that you need to have the kind of right skills for the job, but you also need to get the right lucky opportunity? Because I keep on hearing this from the same
yeah.
people. Like a lot of people, I've got a friend who works at Square Enix and works on the Final Fantasy games,
Me
and he
too, me
said,
too. I have a friend who works there.
might be the same person.
Oh no. Okay, let's talk about that later.
We'll talk about that another time.
Yeah.
But uh, it seems to me like the right opportunity just shows up, and if you're well positioned, like you've set yourself up and thinking this is the kind of thing that I need to do that job, then you'll get it if you're lucky. But you always need to be looking for those kind of opportunities.
I totally agree. So with that one, it didn't just land on my lap, right? So I agree with you completely. Wherein I had to work to get to where I am now, of course, and it's also about just having the right skill set, right? And how do you get to that? You have to look into what you actually want to do. Do you have the capacity to study for that and learn it, and then also be able to apply it in your work? And if you're not able to apply it currently, then what do you need to do to get there? And so I was very lucky again at that time, where in my previous company, so it was an architecture and design firm for luxury hotels and onsens, and it was very interesting. And the architecture industry and design industry is actually quite traditional.
Mm.
And our foreign listeners may not be familiar, but what I mean by that is just not a lot of them are very digitally inclined. And aside from that, it's also the ways of thinking, but we can touch on that more a little bit later. But
Right.
with that, I was one of the pioneers to start our digital marketing campaigns and also running the website. And ultimately, that led me to be able to practice the skills that I actually, because I love tech, I'm very interested in tech, and that gave me the space to just play around with digital marketing and all of the skills that I felt like led me to my position right now. And unfortunately, due to the pandemic, things didn't the direction that my previous company was going was no longer fit with the direction that I saw, and I had a conversation with my boss about it. And yeah, ultimately that pushed me to seek other opportunities, with the blessing of my boss, of course,
Mm.
to be able to, I suppose, spread my wings, because I did do a lot for my previous company at that time, and he knew that there were probably other avenues wherein I could put my skills into.
So you've gone into being a director of a video game. It's a marketing company, right? Like you do a lot of marketing and media for video games.
Yes. So moving into my current company, right? So since the opportunity just presented itself, I already had the current skill set, and so going when the opportunity came, it just clicked, right? It's like the stars aligned, because they were looking for someone who is very passionate about games,
Mm.
but also had the skill set to be able to manage the media
Right.
that
And
we have to
it
work
seems like
with.
you need to position yourself for that. So what kind of skills did you look at that in advance and go, okay, so for this job, they're saying they want you have someone to have marketing skills, to be passionate about games, to have this, and you just like checked off all those boxes in your sort of lead up to that job? Or was it something where it just happened to be lucky and have you had all the right skills that they were looking for?
Yeah, so in any industry, really, even whether it's the gaming industry or what have you, right? There are several types of jobs in any industry, in any company. And so, for example, I have a friend who works as a designer, right, in Square Enix, and that's amazing. And so she had the skills for that, and it's the same for me. It's just that uh to answer your question, I suppose that they were looking for someone who had managerial experience and also a good view of digital marketing and managing websites and content, and also had a very intense passion for games.
Mhm.
So those 3 points were very important to be able to do my role well, and that's how it eventually worked out.
Yeah.
But for example, if I was because there are also positions where they were looking for engineers, right, or designers. I obviously, even if I applied to that, I wouldn't be able to get into them.
Yeah.
So I would, to answer your question, yes, I did look at the skill set that was necessary. And it just so happened that when the opportunity was open at that time, I already had them. So I do recommend doing that as well if you're looking into being able to do a specific job or having a certain position. You take a look into the job openings at that time and have a look see
Yeah.
which skills do you have and which skills do you need to work on, and then just work on them, right? And then maybe eventually, like after you work on them, like a year after, then maybe another position will be open in a different company and then you'll be able to get in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you say, based on your experience of looking for jobs in the video game industry in Japan, that having Japanese ability is an absolute necessity, or is it just for specific kinds of jobs where you need to be able to speak Japanese because you're working with a lot of other people, you're managing people,
Yeah.
and you need to work in a sort of either multicultural or mostly Japanese environment?
Yeah, good question. I think it really boils down to the type of job that you're going to be doing. So I have a lot of friends who are engineers, regardless of whether it's in the gaming industry or any other industry, like a technology company. They don't really need to speak Japanese at all, if just a little bit, I suppose, to be able to communicate with some of their peers, right? But for my type of job, right, because it's managerial, as a director, I need to work with different teams in my company, and I work in a Japanese company, so it's not an international company working here in Japan, right? It's fully, it was created here and is moving toward going international. And although I do play a huge part in growing it internationally, I still have to work a lot with our local departments, our marketing department, for example, and engineering department, and they're mostly Japanese, right? And so it depends on the job, really. I for my particular job, I needed the Japanese because to communicate well with all of the people that I need to work with, I needed at least business level Japanese. But yeah, if you're a designer, right, like they can just show you what they want and then you can be able to draw it. So I don't, but I can't really speak much for designers because I do have a friend who tried her luck to work in Japan, right, as a designer. And for some reason, like they required quite a high level of Japanese as well for that one. So unfortunately, she had a difficult time finding a job.
I
Yeah.
wonder as well, like what is it really like working in Japan in an industry like this? Like as you said, it seems like it's quite traditional, and so you being in sort of like a director role,
Yeah.
and especially as a foreign woman, that might be sort of a different dynamic than it might be overseas. So I
Yeah.
wonder if you can speak to that. Like, what is it like being a director of maybe like a traditional Japanese company that's started in Japan
Mhm.
as a woman? Where a lot of people think this society, and I mean it's mostly true, that this society does tend to be more masculine focused out the workplace.
Yeah, so in my previous company, it was actually a little bit more traditional than my current company. So, what I've come to find is that the perceptions of certain things change depending on which company you're working at because uh, there are certain industries that are a little bit more traditional than others.
Mm.
And I suppose even now with my current company, despite it, so it's a very young company, and the structures are a little bit flatter than your typical Japanese company, but it's still Japanese, right? And so there are certain aspects of Japanese culture that still permeate the situation. But I suppose it's like it's quite funny because I have very few colleagues who are female. Like most of the time, I find myself being the sole, for example, in a previous company, female manager. And right now, I am actually the only female director in the global media department. And it's quite an interesting experience because I do find that I have to, I don't want to say like toughen up a little bit because, and I feel like this is a different and quite a very deep topic that we can
Mhm.
dive into, right? But like but a lot of like in corporate culture there is this certain level of masculinity that you have to uphold to be able to I suppose lead people. And I don't want, and especially in industries that are male dominated. So I did notice that I had to be a little bit like for example, in my personal life, I'm quite bubbly and I use emojis all the time. But at work, like I'd use less exclamation points, and I don't know. I don't know if that makes a difference, but I feel like it does because it's the way of communication. And I do see it. For example, I did have a colleague who was working with one of our female subordinates, and she used a lot of emojis, and he was judging that, right?
Interesting.
So I know, and it shouldn't make any difference, right? If she's giving you the type of work that is needed for that is called for her job, then it shouldn't really matter. But I suppose I'm a little bit more conscious of the type of image I'm projecting as a woman to be able to sit in this space.
So how do you kind of make yourself feel like you're, because it's kind of an odd dichotomy, right? It's like you want to feel
Yeah.
like you're part of the team, and that's a lot of kind of demands on you to do that. Like, don't use as many emojis and don't kind of like be yourself. But how do you do that without sort of losing what actually makes you a valuable part of the company, which is your sort of unique perspective and your ability to do things from a different point of view?
That's a very, very good question. And I have been asking myself this question for a long time, and most recently, actually, because I have been living in Japan for about 5.5 years now. And, I'm still Asian. So even though where I grew up, there were a lot of Western influences. And so I'm quite direct actually in my communication style. And it was really a huge struggle at first coming into Japan and wanting to assimilate, because I think it's very important to be able to understand the culture and the people that you're working with, right? To be able to mesh well with the society that you're working in. And it was quite the struggle at first because, for example, there were moments wherein I felt like I would have wanted to say something, but because of the hierarchical structures that I find myself here, sometimes it's not appropriate to speak out in certain situations, right? And it was very tough at that time to hold my tongue in situations where I feel like I could have said something, right? But I've come to work with that, where I'm able to respect the culture that I'm in and also uphold my own values through creating situations that could make space for that. I am very lucky because I am in a position where I can make space for that, right? For example, we do have, up until recently, we didn't have any meetings for discussion, right? It's usually top down. But nowadays, since I'm very lucky to be in a company that is very open to new ideas as well. We've had we've had more meetings where they were more of a discussion type. So it's for progress, right? And so they're more willing to listen, regardless of whether the person is a boss or a subordinate, right?
That's
And
great.
so, yeah. So I
Well,
think
so
yeah.
what is your day-to-day job actually like then? Because it sounds like there's sort of a meetings element to it, and then there's like direction and working with other people.
Mhm.
But I think people don't really have necessarily a concept or an image of what it's like working in a Japanese video game company. So what
Yeah.
is that like, and what do you usually do on a sort of day-to-day basis? Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the conversation, and I just want to take a quick moment to mention that this podcast is only possible because of the support of JobsinJapan.com. So next time you're looking for a job, check out JobsinJapan.com. There are tons of jobs on there, not only in English teaching, but also software engineering, hospitality, marketing and consulting, among many others. Most of the jobs on the board do not require any specific level of Japanese, and you can get started in minutes. So next time you're looking for a job, check out JobsinJapan.com, and let's get back to the conversation.
Yeah. Okay. So for my particular role as a director, we do have a lot of meetings. There is one particular meeting that I almost always have to attend, and it's like a wrap up of the previous week. And so that takes a lot of time. Like we usually prepare for it, like we gather the data that we were able to observe through Google Analytics, for example, and all of the tools that you use for analyzing big numbers. And I take a look at that, and then I report, and then we see how we can improve on that if it wasn't so good. So that's what that meeting is for. And usually my whole day is taken up by that meeting and
Wow.
preparing for it, speaking up, and then working on the feedback that we've gotten. So it's actually, we work really well as a team in that sense. Like I have co-directors with me who deal with the global media department, and we do a lot of brainstorming on Mondays, and it was moved to Tuesdays so we could have a little bit more space for longer vacations. Thank
Mhm.
goodness. But the rest of the week is more about the leading other people in my team, basically, and we have a lot of I handle a lot of writers who write for our company as well, and it's just figuring out how to move them around in a way that they can fully express their creativity but also work around the rigid structures of a Japanese company as well, because we do have our targets.
Right. And what kind
So
of work is that? Is that something like, are you creating videos, or are you creating like blog posts or articles for media sites, or what
yeah.
kind of work is that?
Yeah, right. So, our company is ultimately a video game media company. And so, most of the product is a website, right? And we give several articles that would help video game gamers to do better in their games. So it's like, how would you say? Like, if you grew up in my generation, which would be what, in the 90s to early 2000s, we used to have these guidebooks for video games. Are you familiar with
Yeah, yeah. I used to read them when I was a kid, and I had all of the different ones. And I think the last one I bought was for one of the Dark Souls games. So
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
really
I I bought one for Final Fantasy because there were a lot of like hidden contents, right, that you
yeah.
couldn't
And back,
really
especially
find.
back in those days in the 90s, because we didn't really have like we had.
Exactly.
I think the internet was just starting when I was in sort of
For
my
sure.
teens. It was
Yeah.
just getting going, and so trying to find information about things. We would all our friends, we would all just like talk with each other about, oh, did you know that you can do this, and there would be like a hidden wall or something
I
that the
know.
developers put in that they didn't.
Yeah.
People found it out just by clicking X on everything.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And yeah, so it's basically that one, but it was transformed with the times, right? Now it's they still exist, right? These guidebooks, but they nowadays it's moved on to websites, and that's basically what we do. We think of any kind of content that users or gamers would find the most interesting, and then we create that.
Mhm.
And well, I don't do the creation side anymore because I'm a director, so I'm more on the management side, and so it's the writers that do that. And sometimes I get kind of jealous, right? Because you would think that I play games all day. I
No,
wish.
it's
I
still a job,
wish.
right?
I know. I wish. Although we do have positions in our company where you're a game. You. The work is to play and to be able to give us the specific content that we need to be able to understand it and also deliver it to the users. And so that's great. I wish I applied for that job. Kidding. But yeah, some of our writers do play. Sometimes I do play to be able to understand the game a little bit more, but majority of my job is mostly about managing the people and the content that we dish out.
That's really good. Okay, so
Yeah.
what kind of advice would you give for people who are interested in working in either the video game industry or like an adjacent industry like yours with media production? What
Yeah.
advice would you give them in terms of setting themselves up for a good career in the industry and trying to find jobs on the ground here in Japan? Like if they've moved here, maybe they're doing something different. Like maybe they're working for, an
Yeah.
architecture company like you were, or maybe they're teaching English and they've been studying their Japanese and they really want to work in the games industry. What advice would you give them to sort of get their foot in the door?
Right. So I'd say take a look at which job posting you'd be interested in first, right? So know the skills that you need to be able to get your foot in the door. So if you're looking to be a designer, then check it out. An engineer, then check that out. There's so with the internet, we can learn so many things just by going online, and so I feel like the gap here has been closed much, or has gotten so much smaller than it was in previous years. And so I think if you can put your mind to it and you put the effort and energy into it, you can basically be anything you want if you learn to be one. And so after you you check out the skill set that you need, and then you keep your doors open, right? So after you've learned all of the skills, then you try applying, right? And so you never know that they might be actually open to someone like you, because in the gaming industry in particular, it takes a lot of passion. You need to really be into games to be able to survive, because we are really busy. Because games, it's still entertainment, and with
Mhm.
with the entertainment industry or with the media industry, it's it's very fast paced, especially with people's attention spans getting shorter and shorter throughout the times. The speed that you need to have to be able to dish out as much entertaining content, whether that's games or media,
Hmm.
it's really quite fast paced. And so you need to have the grit to be able to survive such a competitive environment. And so this is where the passion for games really just plays a huge role in your being able to enjoy the type of work that you're doing. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you know that you're doing this for example, a game that you really love and you want to be able to share this with other people. And ultimately, that's what drives a lot of us people who work in the gaming industry. Like my friend who is a designer, she works weekends, but she knows that she wants to be able to deliver a really pretty face for for the game that she's developing. Right? She works with faces and face molding, and so it's really the passion there, right? So having the grit, the passion, and also just the motivation to be able to try harder if you don't if it doesn't work out the first time around, because I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure like it's not gonna work out the first time, especially if you don't have any industry experience, but you just keep going. Like I never gave up, and that's what brought me here. So I think that's all you need.
Yeah, that's really great advice, because I think a lot of people they try maybe once or twice and they don't get in, but having that passion for it and really like being able to put up with a lot of maybe like even having jobs that you don't enjoy so much
Yeah.
because they give you a sort of something on your resume that you can then apply for the job that you do want in the future.
That's for sure. Totally, totally. Because even like as I've mentioned before, I worked in the architecture and design industry before, and who would have thought that I'd end up working for an industry that I've always wanted to work for, right, as a child. And it's because I was willing to work in a very different industry, but also still work on my skill set, right?
Hmm.
That ultimately led me here. So I agree with you completely. Like sometimes you really have to get down and dirty to be able to get to that spot. But I feel like that's life, right? Like
Yeah.
they say the best things don't never come easy, and so I live by that as a principle.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's great. I I also wanted to ask about what you see as the future for people who are in your industry, because I know there's a lot of things like uh with media, it's always changing. You know, like when I got into digital marketing, even just like 5 years ago, Facebook was the number one thing that we wanted
Oh,
to be able to
yeah.
use, and now Facebook is like down and down and down all the time,
Hmm.
and it's TikTok, and it's a completely different format, completely different
Sure.
uh atmosphere in the app. You know, like it's you've got to hook their interest in the first 0.5 seconds, otherwise they're going to swipe past you, right?
Yeah.
So it's a completely different feel. So what are the skills that people should be looking to the future to
Mhm.
go, okay, well, the next thing, or maybe it's just flexibility as well, maybe it's just like being able to adjust to different media, but like what would you say is something that people need to be doing if they wanted to work in the industry in the future?
Right. I think you should always keep your eyes peeled to the ever evolving climate that we are working with right now.
Right.
So it doesn't matter whether you're talking about games or the gaming industry, because even in the gaming industry, like the trends are changing really quickly,
Yeah.
right? Back then RPGs were the bomb,
Hmm.
and nowadays it's like mostly online gaming. Like I don't know if you're familiar with Genshin. That's a really very popular game nowadays. Or MOBA, like Pokemon Unite, and all of these new games that are coming out. So it's just having an eye for what's working out in the current scene or marketplace.
That's even if maybe it's not your kind of game as well, because you know, uh I like you, I grew up on sort of the JRPGs that
Yeah.
I thought were just the most amazing thing.
Mhm.
And it's funny because we haven't really seen very many of those in the last 10 years, like nothing really game changing. You know, there's like Octopath Traveler and things like
Yeah.
that that have
Yeah, I
kind of
would
been trying to
agree.
revive that genre, but it's not as, because you know, you go back and play some of the games that you played when you were a kid, and that
Mhm.
you're just like, oh my god, it's so slow, I can't,
I
like
know.
wading through molasses, it's crazy. So I guess keeping up with the trends is a really important
Yes.
thing,
Yes.
even
Yes.
if it's in, you know, so for me in the industry I'm working in, trying to understand TikTok, even though, you know, I'm a millennial, I'm not like a Gen Z, you know, like the Gen Z kids, they all get it. They all get it
Yeah.
immediately because it's what they've
Yeah.
grown up with. So it's
Yeah.
like being able to adjust and not get old and get left behind by technology.
Man, like I feel like age is really just a number. So I
Mhm.
would, yeah, but I do agree that you really have to keep up with the trends. Like I don't understand TikTok as much as well, but it is veering toward that direction. And that's why if you've seen Instagram or Facebook, um, they've been focusing a lot on reels nowadays, which is a
Mhm.
concept that was brought over from I suppose Snapchat and TikTok, right?
Right.
And the key here is to just have the flexibility. You're right when you mentioned that a while ago. It's the flexibility to be able to keep moving forward with the times and to keep your eyes peeled to the news and the trends.
Mhm.
Because if you don't have that, especially in such a paced industry as the media and gaming industry, then you're going to be left behind.
Mhm.
And right, so it's just like keeping up with the news and also be willing to try and to figure them out. So as much as I don't understand TikTok, I I have been looking into that as well because ultimately they are the new generation that will be playing with the games,
Mm.
right? And so you really have to understand their psyche as well.
Yeah, especially in this industry where, I think gaming tends to skew younger, although I guess that's changing because
Yes.
our generation is, most of my guy friends still play video games. Like we play games together and stuff online, but
Yeah.
the younger generation, like almost all of them are playing some kind of games. Even girls are much more likely to be interested in games now than they were
Yeah.
when I was a kid. So
Yeah.
I think that means that being open to that is a really good a good way to at least set yourself up if you want to get a job in that industry. You can start thinking, okay, well, this is what's really popular. All the kids are playing Fortnite, or even that's probably old now. Like they probably moved on to something else.
Yeah.
But knowing what's popular will help you to then get into a games company because they're
For
chasing
sure.
what's popular too.
For sure, for sure. And I completely agree because ultimately that's what they're looking for, right? Fresh ideas and an eye for what's new and the trends is definitely a valued skill in our industry. So to be able to suggest certain new ideas that could possibly help, right, with the booming, like with the boom that is about to come with new trends.
Mm.
So having the eye is a very, very important skill to have. Yeah. And how do I say this? Like, for example, I feel like the lines are blurring nowadays with games and also just social media, right? Because there are more games that work around social media as well. And
Hmm.
also even with Bitcoin, right? There are now games that work with creating money and investing. So it's even working in a direction that it's permeating different aspects of our lives. So it's not just a game anymore. It's also a
Hmm.
social media platform and it's also like a way to make money, a financial platform. So yeah, it's like sometimes you wouldn't even know, like if you're working in the financial industry, suddenly you'll find yourself in the gaming industry because that's where the direction of new games are going into.
That's so
So
interesting.
yeah,
I wouldn't have imagined, but but it's very exciting. Like there's a lot of opportunities for people who maybe aren't just coders and not just artists, but like people who are in all kinds of different industries
for
now have
sure.
more opportunities to get into this kind of thing.
For sure, for sure. Like I wish I studied finance a little bit more because I'm very into because isn't it an interesting concept to be able to learn to earn money and also play games?
Hmm.
And so the developers of those kinds of games are of course looking for financial advisors because they want to know how how do the interest rates work, or how are they able to how will the users be able to sell them to make money,
Hmm.
right? So these are certain advice that only people who are pros in the industry will be able to give.
Right, and I think
Yeah.
it's because a lot of the games, the way they make money has completely changed. It's not just, sell a game for $60 anymore.
Yes,
It's
yes,
they have whole economies that grow up around these games,
for
and a lot of
sure,
games have an internal economy as well. I think
for
one of the ones that I
sure.
remember from when I was younger was there was a space one that had been around for a long time. I can't remember what it was called, but it was incredibly popular even 20 years after it was made
Mhm.
because there was this internal economy that would, like, the values of things would go up and down based on what the players in the game
Are
wanted
into
and did. And
yeah,
that kind of thing, like, you really do need to actually understand, what the how much do items change the value of the currency in the game. There's this thing called, I think it's called power creep,
Yeah.
where it's like every time they release an expansion or an upgrade or an update, things get slightly more powerful, because otherwise, if you just release an update with the thing that's the same power as stuff you already have,
Yeah.
then it's not interesting.
Yeah.
So that means that old things then need to be, buffed or boosted or changed, so that they can make it interesting to the players who are still playing the same game, 10 years on. Like I played Dota for like, maybe 10 years, and having that game change completely as you're going through. I mean, you really do need to understand how essentially a micro economy works.
Yeah, for sure. And right, isn't it amazing that these games have survived throughout the times, right? So I think that also plays a key role, right? Like the flexibility to be able to move through the times, whether it's inside the economy of that game as well or outside of it. So I don't know, like, have you ever played Ragnarok? Are you familiar with the game Ragnarok?
I've heard of Ragnarok, but I never played it.
Yeah, but then it's like it disappeared sometime a few years later. So they're developing it again. I think they just released one, or is it about to be released? But I think like the survivability of a particular game really depends on how much they're able to adjust to the moving trends as well. Like I think Genshin is doing a really good job in that. Like it's been running for about more than a year now, but it's still very popular among their players, right? You would think, because the usual lifetime of a game is just a few months. Online games a little bit longer, right? But even then, to be able to keep the interest of its users, it would be very difficult. For example, we used to cover Pokemon Unite, and at the start, so for those who are not familiar, Pokemon Unite is it's a MOBA game for Pokemon, and it's all online and it's for free, and it's really fun. It's just that the concept, the game's concept has remained the same, and I suppose maybe that's why a lot of the original players have moved on to other games in the Pokemon series, right? But I believe that it's still a very, very great game that could continue on with the times, because it's a platform to compete.
Yeah.
So the esports industry is growing really rapidly. I don't know if you're familiar, but there are actually esports professional players. And it's so funny, right? Like if I mention any of these things to my parents from that generation, what do you mean like an esports player? Like are they even like actually professional players?
Well, I think recently they changed some. I think one of the big changes in this was the United States created a visa for it was like for esports players,
Oh,
so
that's
that they
amazing.
could come for tournaments and stuff. So
Oh,
they
I
would
love
get a
that.
fast tracked visa,
I
so that they
love
could
that.
travel for tournaments. Which it was very similar to what you would have for a tennis player or a
I
golfer or
see.
something. And so it's very interesting that it's kind of being incorporated. And there were people even talking about having esports in the Olympics, which I don't know if that's a step too far, but I talked about this with my students when I was
I
teaching.
know.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
what's different? Why is esports not a sport? It's competitive. They have teams. They have to train. They have to practice. Like, the only difference really is that the physical element is reduced to much lower because you're sitting at a computer desk. But
Yeah.
like, even that, I think you still have to train your mind, to
And
be
even your
quick.
fingers, like in
Yeah.
particular, for example, like it's so funny, right? Like it's such a funny concept, but really though, it puts a strain on, like, you use certain fingers to be able to play a game well, depending on also the console that you're using, right? And I think it takes a lot of like physical rigor as well in that aspect to keep going and playing for hours at a time especially when you're competing.
Yeah, maintain
So
that focus and
yeah,
concentration.
yeah, it's actually pretty difficult.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of respect for esports players as well as, of course, athletes.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Kristel, I could talk with you about video games all day. Like we could nerd out all day, but I think we should draw it to a close here because we've been talking for like 45 minutes or
I
something.
know, I'm
Thank you so much for
surprised.
coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your perspective.
Thank you so much as well. I had a great time speaking with you, Charlie, and I hope we get to speak more about this topic, games, especially in the industry, and just learning more about how to work and live in Japan and succeed here. So I think you're doing a really great thing for people who are very interested in working and living in Japan. So I support you, and I hope
Hmm.
we get to interact with each other again in the future. Thank you so
Yeah, thank you
much.
so much. Yeah, I really appreciate that.